If you haven't seen part 1, watch part 1 first, otherwise you won't understand the whole video. We all know the classic narrative Eve, first woman, walks through. A serpent enters Eden, humanity takes a hit, nosedive. But have you ever paused to, who or what was this? Serpent, was it just a crafty snake or something much more sinister? Since most of us learned that the serpent in the Garden of Eden was Satan in disguise, okay. But what if I stated that several ancient books, Christian early thinkers, perceived this serpent as more than just a tempter? They, Lucifer himself, not simply enticing Eve into disobedience, but engaging in something far more intimate. Let's break this down. Genesis 3:1 describes the serpent as more cunning than any beast of the field. But what if this cunning wasn't just about smarts? What if it indicated at a deeper, more personal relationship between the snake and Eve? The Hebrew word used here, a chamber, might also signify anything more beyond merely craft. It could suggest a shrewdness that's almost human. Some scholars say this serpent was a divine creature, possibly a fallen one who had a real personal interaction with Eve. Now here's where things get really interesting in several ancient Jewish and early Christian texts. There's an argument that the serpent didn't only talk Eve into eating the fruit, he lured her. The Book of Enoch and other apocryphal scriptures hint at celestial creatures, angels, or in this occasion, fallen angels who wished human woman. Could it be that Lucifer, in the form of the serpent, accomplished more than just whisper in Eve's ear? Might he have used his charm and influence to seduce her both intellectually and physically? And think about this. The act of consuming the forbidden fruit has frequently been considered as a metaphor. So, what if this eating was actually a sign for something more profound, like the loss of innocence through a sexual act? Early Christian Gnostics and other mystics often interpreted biblical events in deeply symbolic ways. For them, the serpent's job wasn't simply to entice Eve with knowledge, but to initiate her into a form of forbidden divine intimacy. Now, this might sound as a crazy theory, but let's explore further. The church fathers like Irenaeus and Justin Marr described how Satan wanted to contaminate humanity from the start. Beginning, what better way to do this than to start with the mother of all living, Eve? And what better method than through an act that combines both knowledge and intimacy? This wasn't simply about breaking God's command, it was about building a bond that linked humanity to the fallen angelic planet in the most personal way. Doable. Now, if you're familiar with Genesis 3:15, you know this verse is, when God says to the serpent, I will place hatred between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head and you shall bruise his heel. This isn't simply some lyrical language. This is a declaration of continuous confrontation between two lineages. But what does it signify when it talks about the snake seed? May this be suggesting at actual physical offspring? Here's where things get very wild. Some readings, particularly those founded in Gnostic and apocryphal passages, suggest that Lucifer, in his position since the serpent didn't merely tempt Eve, he fathered a kid with her. This seed of the serpent is supposed to be a literal bloodline, one that began with Cain. Let's break this down. Cain, the firstborn of Eve, is a figure shrouded in mystery and tragedy. He's the one who kills his brother Abel properly. But there's a suggestion that Cain's actions weren't just the product of jealousy or human frailty. They were the expression of his actual nature, acquired from Lucifer himself. Cain, as the seed of the snake, is viewed by some as the progenitor of a line that carried the features of revolt, violence, and separation from God today. Before you discard this as pure speculation, consider this: in many ancient traditions, the concept of a dual seed line is common. There's the line of Seth the third, son of Adam and Eve, which is commonly considered as the righteous root. And then there's the line of Cain, which is marked by sin and rebellion. But what if the reason for this dichotomy is because Cain wasn't actually Adam's son, but Lucifer's? This interpretation is sponsored by varied groups and apocryphal literature that go on the idea of fallen angels interacting with humanity. The Book of Enoch, for instance, speaks extensively about the Watchers angels, who descended to earth and had offspring with human women, whereas the Watchers are unique from Lucifer. The notion of angelic beings fathering children with humans is central to these old stories. If we extend this notion to the Genesis story, the serpent seed becomes more than simply a metaphor, it becomes a literal bloodline. But why does this matter? Should we care if Cain was Lucifer's son? Because if this theory holds water, it changes all we know about the beginnings of evil in the world. It suggests that the conflict between good and evil isn't only spiritual, it's biological. Entrenched in the fundamental DNA of humanity, Cain's descendants, marked by the influence of Lucifer, would carry this innate inclination towards sin, setting the scene for decades of conflict. This also connects into the larger theme of duality in the Bible. We often watch the conflict between light and darkness, between God's chosen people and those who stand against them. If Cain's lineage is truly the seed of the serpent, then this duality has a much deeper, more sinister origin. It's not just a war of ideologies, it's a battle of bloodlines of inheritance, where the descendants of Cain, influenced by their father's rebellion, stand in opposition against the descendants of Seth, who bear the promise of redemption. Now let's dive into the nightier of what that forbidden fruit might genuinely reflect, and trust me, this isn't your usual Sunday school lesson. In the Genesis story, we see Eve taking a nibble from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But what if this behavior wasn't about literally eating a chunk of fruit? In many ancient traditions, especially within Gnostic literature, the act of devouring anything, whether it's fruit or otherwise, is typically suggestive of gaining knowledge or experiencing something deeply transformative. And when it comes to Eve's contact with the serpent, some Gnostic literature suggests that this wasn't just about gaining intellectual knowing, but experiencing carnal knowledge, sexual knowledge. Let's talk specifics. The Gospel of Philly, a vital Gnostic text, drops some key signals that the account in Genesis was about far more than just disobedience. In verse 71 of the Gospel of Philip, it states the tree in the center of paradise is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It is an adversary to the knowledge of the law of God. But here's where it gets fascinating. The same text later references how knowledge may be a sort of intimate connection, saying the world came into being through an error, for he who created it wanted to create it imperishable and immortal. He fell short of reaching his want. This idea of a mistake relates profoundly with the concept of the fall being not merely a sin of disobedience, but of an intimate, forbidden union. The Gnostics were all about hidden meanings, and they often saw biblical events as allegories for deeper, more esoteric truths. For them, the AC of eating the apple was symbolic of her gaining close understanding of someone she was never supposed to know. And here's where things grow even more intense. Some Gnostic interpretations suggest that this understanding wasn't merely mental or spiritual, it was corporeal, carnal. The act of eating the fruit becomes a metaphor for a close union with the serpent, who they saw as an embodiment of a divine being in rebellion, possibly even Lucifer himself. But let's go even deeper in another Gnostic scripture. The Apocrypha of John, we read an account that reinterprets the creation story. Essentially, it tells how Eve's encounter with a serpent led to her being imbued with a spirit of life. But it wasn't just any spirit, it was a spirit of carnal understanding that the snake conveyed to her. This wasn't simply regarding disobedience, it was about a profound experience that transformed the course of humanity. The scripture says, "And he, the serpent, intended to bring out a work of art. And she took from the tree and ate." Here the work of art can be seen as the act of creation itself, a creation that was both bodily and spiritual, born out of a band union. This belief that the fruit was a metaphor for sexual knowledge isn't merely bound to Gnostic texts. Even in more mainstream interpretations, there's typically a connection suggested between the disappearance of innocence and the awakening of sexual consciousness. But the Gnostics considered this to a whole new level, suggesting that the knowledge you've received was something deeply intimate, something that connected her to the surface snake in a way that was both profound and unsafe. And this leads us back to the primary subject of the serpent seed. If he's eating of the fruit was actually a metaphor for an intimate act with the serpent, then the offspring of that act, Cain, would indeed be the germ of the serpent, both symbolically and literally. Okay, right? We've been finding some really intense theories about the serpent Eve and the forbidden fruit. But now let's bring another intriguing character into the mix, Lilith. You might be thinking, what does Lilith have to do with all of this? Well, hold on to your seats because this connection is about to take us on a wild ride through Jewish mysticism and Ban writings that give insight on an even deeper, darker aspect of the Genesis tale. Thus, who was Lilith according to Jewish mysticism specifically? The alphabet of Benner. Lilith was actually Adam's first wife formed before Eve. Now, Lilith isn't named in the Bible, but she shows up. There are a lot of old literature that were regarded too contentious for conventional scripture in these texts. Lilith is described as a powerful, defiant lady who refuses to submit to Adam's authority. She's said to have left the Garden of Eden to mingle with demons, especially some say with Lucifer himself. Here's where things get really fascinating. The Zohar, one of the fundamental texts of Jewish Kabbalistic mysticism, talks about Lilith in a way it binds her directly to the serpent. The Zohar says that Lilith, after departing Adam, became the consort of Samael, a figure commonly linked with Lucifer in Zohar 3:19a. It stated Samuel, the huge demon, and Lilith, the harlot, came together and generated a horde of malevolent demons. But this union wasn't simply about establishing spirits, it was about Lilith obtaining a partner in her rebellion against the heavenly order. So how does this relate into our prior points? Some interpretation says that Lilith, after becoming Samuel's companion, returned to the Garden of Eden in the form of the serpent. Yeah, that's true. There's a belief that Lilith herself was the serpent who lured Eve. Yet here's the kicker. This wasn't just about tempting you to eat the fruit, it was about Lilith as united with Lucifer, enticing Eve into a deeper, darker wisdom, one that Lilith herself had obtained via her own revolt. In this view, Lilith wasn't only a side character, she was sent to the complete fall of man by seducing Eve. Lilith, in the shape of the serpent, passed on the knowledge and power she had received from her union with Lucifer. This wasn't just knowledge of good and evil. It was understanding of the divine and the demonic. A combination of the two that signaled humanity's plunge into a world where both forces will forever be at war. But it doesn't stop there. In the alphabet of Benera, Lilith is also characterized as a person who strives to corrupt and destroy human offspring. This links directly with the concept of the seed of the snake that we suggested before. If Lilith as the snake seduced Eve, then the offspring of this union, Cain, would not only be the seed of Lucifer, but also the continuation of Lilith's rebellious lineage. Cain's descendants then would hold within them the combined features of both Lucifer and Lilith rebellion knowledge, and a profound underlying connection to the demonic. And what about Eve in this situation? Eve isn't just a passive participation in the fall. She becomes a pivotal person in a cosmic war between divine forces unknowingly brought into Lilith rebellion. But now, let's take this deeper, becoming one of the most mysterious and intriguing groupings mentioned in ancient texts, the Nephilim. These beings are a fascinating and contentious topic in both the Bible and apocryphal works. And when we relate them to the concept of a union between Lucifer and Eve, things get really fascinating. Let's start with the basics. The Nephilim are mentioned in Genesis 6:4. The Nephilim were on the world in those days, and also later when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of ancient men of renown. But what does this have to do with Lucifer, Eve, and the serpent? Well, buckle up, because in some apocryphal texts, there's a hypothesis that the Nephilim were not just any offspring. They were the outcome of couplings between divine beings and humans. And guess who might be at the center of this? The Book of Enoch. An old text that was omitted from the canonical Bible provided us a far more thorough look at these creatures in Enoch 6:1-4. It recounts how a troop of angels known as the Watchers descended to earth and grabbed human women as their wives. These marriages resulted in the birth of the Nephilim, gigantic beings with extraordinary powers. But here's the twist. While the Book of Enoch primarily focuses on the Watchers, some interpretation suggests that Lucifer himself, as the commander of fallen angels, might have been involved in these early unions, providing the stage for these hybrid beings. Now let's tie this to our ongoing narrative. Suppose we examine the concept that Lucifer, in the shape of the snake, had a union with Eve. It's not that far-fetched to consider that this deed could have led to the birth of beings with remarkable. Despite supernatural features like the Nephilim, these offspring begotten of both divine revolt and human frailty would have been distinctive in their nature section human component. Angelic, with a lineage that ties straight back to Lucifer's rebellion, yet it doesn't stop there. The Book of Jubilees. Another spurious text adds more to this narrative in Jubilees 5:1-2. It describes how the Nephilim flooded the earth with violence and sin, leading to God's choice to cleanse the earth with the flood. This links closely to the idea that the Nephilim as hybrid beings were fundamentally corrupt, carrying within them the rebellious essence of their angelic fathers. If Cain, as the offspring of Lucifer and Eve, was part of this lineage, then his descendants would carry the same traits that would eventually lead to the catastrophe events of the flood, this concept supported by the apocryphal texts. The Book of Enoch explains how the Watchers and their offspring led humanity astray, teaching them forbidden knowledge and encouraging them to sin. If we spread this storyline to include Lucifer as the original seducer, then the story of the Nephilim becomes even more significant. It's not just about a group of fallen angels, it's about the straight influence of Lucifer on the human race, resulting to a lineage that would forever be marked by its beginnings in rebellion. What's even more intriguing is the probability that this lineage didn't end with the flood. The Book of Numbers, another section of the canonical Bible, states that the Nephilim were still present in the country of Canaan long after the flood. This shows that the effect of these hybrid beings, and by extension, the effect of Lucifer, continuing to shape the course of human history. In Genesis 4:11-12, God curses Cain for the murder of Abel, stating, "Now you are under a curse and pushed from the earth, which opened its mouth to get your brother's blood from your hand while you work the ground. It will no longer provide its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth." But here's where things get intriguing. This curse, some believe, is not merely a punishment, but a symbol of Cain's genuine origin. Let's look to religious traditions and some banned texts for a deeper look. The Tarim Pseudo-Jonathan, an Aramaic translation and interpretation of the Hebrew Bible, includes an additional layer to the narrative of Cain. It suggests that Cain was not simply Adam's son, but possibly the offspring of a relationship between Eve and an angelic being. Maybe Lucifer himself. This would make Cain not just the first murderer, but also the first person born with a mixed lineage carrying within him both divine and demonic traits. This interpretation is supported by other banned literature such as the Gospel of Thomas, which is part of the Nag Hammadi Library, a collection of early Christian and Gnostic manuscripts discovered in Egypt, in Speaking 114. The Gospel of Thomas relates to the idea of spiritual lineage, stating Simon Peter said to them, "Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life." Jesus stated, "I myself shall lead her in order to make her manly, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you, males for every woman who will transform herself." Male will enter the kingdom of heaven. While this text focused on spiritual transformation, some scholars interpret it as hinting at the concept of spiritual and bodily inheritance, where lineage and actions are related to one spiritual identity. Now suppose Cain were indeed the offspring of Eve and Lucifer, then his curse would take on a whole new meaning. The mark cast upon him could be seen as a divine recognition of his genuine essence, part human, part divine, but also part demonic. This could explain why Cain's descendants, as mentioned in the Bible, were distinguished by violence, innovation, and restlessness. They were, after all, carrying the dual heritage of their ancestor, one that includes the rebellious nature of Lucifer. This idea also links into various religion traditions that debate the mark of Cain as something more than only a physical sign. In some Jewish mysticism, Cain's mark is described not as a visual sign, but as a spiritual mark, an inherent darkness or restlessness that would be handed down through his lineage. This mark could be viewed as the manifestation of Lucifer's influence within Cain, a continual reminder of his mixed origin. And what about the land of Nod, where Cain was exiled? The word Nod in Hebrew implies meandering. But some interpretations show it was more than just a location of exile according to certain Gnostic and early Christian literature. Nod was a realm where other beings like Cain, outcasts, and hybrids existed. This realm could have been a spot where the descendants of Cain continued to live, bearing forward their distinct and troubled lineage. This interpretation challenges conventional perspectives of the Cain and Abel article, giving a bold and contentious perspective that relates Cain's conduct right to his origins. If Cain was indeed the offspring of Eve and Lucifer, then his curse wasn't only a punishment for murder, it was the acknowledgement of the darker forces at play inside him, forces that would continue to affect humanity long after his death. We've walked through the twists and turns of the Genesis story, but let's pull back the glass and take a larger vista across the ancient Near East Gnosticism and other banned texts. There's a repeating motif: divine or demonic entities courting human ladies. This isn't only a biblical notion, it's a theme that echoes through a myriad of cultures, religions, implying a deeper, greater universal truth. Let's start with the ancient Eastern mythology. In Suean mythology, we encounter the narrative of the god Enki, a deity linked with wisdom and magic, who seduces several mortal ladies. In the Epic of Atrahasis, Enki not merely conveys prohibited knowledge to humans, but also engages in relationships with them, leading to the development of hybrid beings. This mirrors the concept that divine creatures interacting with humans produce spring with unique features, just as we considered in the context of Cain and the Nephilim in Gnosticism. This theme takes on an even more deep significance. The Gospel of the Egyptians, a Gnostic text, presents a divine character named Jerath, typically linked with the Damage, or a lesser god who creates and then seduces Eve, leading to the birth of a hybrid race. Gospel of the Egyptians 62:15 states, "And Yerar saw Eve and sought her, and he knew her, and she conceived and had two sons, Elohim and Yahweh." This representation of a divine or demonic being seducing a human lady and producing offspring directly parallels the idea that Lucifer, as the snake, might have done the same with Eve, leading to the birth of Cain, reaching beyond the Bible. In Gnostic texts, we discover comparable stories in other banned literature. The Book of Giants, another text from the Dead Sea Scrolls, informs of celestial beings, the Watchers, who descend to earth and take human wives, creating giants. The Nephilim Book of Giants fragment for Q 530 describes how these beings, through their partnerships with human women, brought about turmoil and destroy. This concept of divine or demonic being courting human ladies and creating hybrid offspring runs deep in these old traditions, strengthening the narrative we've been investigating. So why is this essential? What does it teach us about the story of Lucifer and Eve? So it argues that the Genesis account might not be an independent narrative, but part of a wider tradition that spans cultures and religions. The concept that a divine or demonic entity may entice a human lady and create offspring with exceptional qualities is a powerful one. It talks to a universal terror and intrigue with the unknown, with the belief that humanity's origins might be related to something far more complicated and mysterious than we've been led to believe in this light. Lucifer's part in the Genesis tale takes on a new level. He's not just a tempter or a rebel. He's member of the cosmic drama, one that involves the mixing of heavenly and human, the development of hybrid beings, and the fight between good and evil. This interpretation invites us to reconsider what we know about the roots of sin, the nature of mankind, and the role of celestial creatures in making our reality. As we coming to a conclusion, let's take a time to ponder about what this all means. The tale of Lucifer and Eve, when viewed through the lens of these old tales and banned texts, becomes more than merely a tale of temptation. It's a story of cosmos significance, one that touches on the deepest worries and dreams of humanity. It reminds us that our origins are hidden in mystery, and that the truths we seek are often buried in the most surprising locations. Thank you for joining us on this voyage into the secret and forbidden tales of the Bible and beyond. Don't forget to hit that like button, leave a comment with your ideas, and subscribe for further deep dive into ancient mysteries. Your support means the world. Join us, and together we might reveal even more of the hidden truths that influence our knowledge of the world. God bless you all, and see you in the future video.